Dr. Bloom. She is a pediatric neuropsychologist who is based in Orlando, Florida. She specializes in working with children and adolescents. She's been working with HFA for a couple of years now, giving presentations, and is one of our most requested speakers. I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to her speak. She's a delight. Her clinical interests include dyslexia, ADHD, and neuropsychological outcomes in school reentry following acquired brain injury and medical illness. As I mentioned, she lives in Florida and spends time often with her husband and 2 children. So without further delay, oh, sorry, one more thing, sorry. You need to choose the language at the bottom of the screen as it says at the bottom. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a globe. You need to pick whether you would like to listen in Spanish or English so that you have full access to this presentation. Esta sesión está disponible en español. Haga clic en el globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione español. Okay, great. I'm done talking. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Bloom. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Heather, are we good? You guys can see okay?
We're good. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to talk about sending your kiddos back to school and having a successful transition to being back to school. And this is perfect timing because we just went back to school just a very short time ago. My kids went back on Wednesday. So this is the beginning of our second week. And then these are some of the slides from HFA and our sponsors. Thank you, sponsors. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about who I'm talking to, because getting a 3-year-old starting school is a very different situation to your senior or college student. Different needs are there. So I'm hoping we can do a quick poll kind of to find out how old your kids are. And if you have one who's in pre-K and one who's in 5th, you can click yes for both. Just to let you guys know while we wait for the results to come in, I've got one going into 5th grade and one going into 7th. And they are much less excited than they were earlier. There was a little bit more, oh, we're going to have to do all of this work again, and a little bit less, oh, I'm going to have all my friends again. But they were actually much happier when they went back. Jeanette, do we have any results?
I believe we are complete. Most people have answered, so I'm going to go ahead and end it, and you'll be able to see the results.
Awesome.
And share.
Okay, so we've got pretty even. Thank you. So most people have got kids who are in elementary school. We've got about 1 out of 6 have a middle or high school student, and about 1 out of 3 have got a daycare pre-K kid. So I will try to make sure that I speak to all of the groups at various points in time as we go through. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I just like to know who I'm talking to. Okay, so this is back to school. And this is, you know, the funny photo that many families take at the start of the year. Sometimes they're not supposed to be funny. They're just supposed to be fun and just commemorative and a way of remembering. But this one went viral. This was a real parent who has, I think it looks like 7 kids. And she was pretty happy when school went back in session, cheering, and the kids looked less happy. And then I think this is really funny because, you know, first day of 5th and 2nd grade, but the dad says it's his 6,287th day of work. And the little girl says, if I don't get a sign, I'm going to scream, because she wants to be in school with big kids. So I think that's really funny. And these are my kiddos through the years. I just had to show it. They grow up very fast, and it feels like time is going incredibly fast. So like I said, they're now in 5th and 7th, and my son is as tall as I am. All right. So, I think if the pandemic taught us anything, and trying to do virtual learning at home taught us anything, it is that school is really great. I think it made us all appreciate it so much. I know I feel like I appreciate it so much. Teachers are incredible. They have such hard jobs. One thing that really came to light during the pandemic, but the research had been there beforehand, is that learning is really an inherently social process. So doing solo work in front of the computer, you do not learn at the same depth or breadth that you would if you were in conversation or in activity with other people. And the way human brains are designed, there have been a lot of studies that have shown that learning actually is a social activity. There's a reason we have schools, because you can learn more in that kind of environment. The other reason is socialization. So we certainly learned how difficult isolation can be during the pandemic, and how incredibly important it is to have that socialization, to build those positive social skills and practice emotional regulation. One thing I learned from my own children's teachers was that most kids do cry at some point during the school year. And that is because they're being asked to do things that are really challenging for them. They're pushing themselves. So it's not at all uncommon. And most teachers have good coping strategies for that. Another thing that school really provides, again, we really felt this during the pandemic, was how much movement the kids are able to get and how tired their bodies can be at the end of the day. And that's incredibly, incredibly good for them. I can tell you that I have a patient who just went back to school for the first time in 2 years, and my check-in with the parents, oh gosh, how's it going? And the first thing they said was, he is so sore, because he just hadn't been doing that much exercise for the past 2 years. And immediately in PE and recess, he was worn out. And that's good for them. It's good for their bodies, as long as, of course, it's safe for your child with a bleeding disorder. School also provides nutrition for an awful lot of kids that are on free or reduced lunch. And so that is a major benefit of it. There were a lot of kids who went hungry when schools went virtual. Also, school provides really important structure and routine. And that's very beneficial, of course, because if you're a working parent, you need that time in order to be able to work. But it also gets kids into a better place of being able to sleep better, being able to eat better, just having that routine and that structure. There were a lot of teenagers who either lost or gained a lot of weight during the pandemic, and many, many teenagers certainly who were up till 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning and really had a hard time sticking with their routine. One thing I want to mention is, though, that summer has a lot of benefits, or having those vacations have a lot of benefits. Travel is really great for kids, broadens their mind. The opportunity to be bored is fantastic. It helps them build creative and executive functioning skills. Being bored is good for kids. They have to find their own solution to it. Unstructured time, unstructured playtime is so important for kids. And I also feel like, I'm speaking for our family, we tend to play a lot more games over the summer because there's more time, there's less homework, and that has a lot of benefits for kids. My kids learned to play backgammon and Settlers of Catan this summer, and I think they learned a lot from it. Okay, so we had a lot of really negative effects of the school closures on kids in K through 12 that we're really finding out about more and more as time goes on. So again, for us to be grateful that hopefully for most kids, you're going back into a relatively normal school year. Of course, COVID is not behind us, unfortunately, but I think there's a lot of protections in place. And as a society, most of us have decided to resume pretty normal function. And that's to benefit for our kids, certainly, who really had a hard time with those school closures, really negative effects there. So on average, the pandemic got kids about 5 months behind in math. This is compared to previous years, the loss that they normally experience over the summer. That there's always a little bit of summer learning loss, but there was an additional 5 months of learning loss in math, 4 months in reading, and it hit the disadvantaged students the hardest. They were more likely to be further behind in math, on average 7 months. There were a lot more kids who dropped out of high school. High schoolers were less likely to attend college. One thing that I noticed was that I had a number of friends whose kids went off to college and came back. These are think kids who outside of the pandemic probably would have had success in going to college. And because of the mental health issues mostly that they had experienced during the pandemic, they ended up leaving college and coming home. The 35% of parents were either very or extremely concerned around their child's mental health. So we had a huge increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide, unfortunately, among kids overall, but especially teenagers. And then there's a big impact of the pandemic on their total earning that they might earn over the life of their lifetime and on the economy. So we're grateful for school. We're grateful that we're back, and we, I think, appreciate it more than ever. So here's just a graph kind of showing average earning grades 1 through 6, and this is math particularly. And in the spring shutdown, I don't think this will surprise anyone who tried to do schoolwork with their kids during the spring shutdown, how much was lost. But then, unfortunately, even when they went back, there continued to be this big gap here. So we lost a lot. We lost a little less in reading, but we still lost a lot, and we still haven't gotten quite back up to that curve. And so we are grateful. We're grateful for school and for all that it comes with, but there's no question it is a big time of transition, and it can be difficult indeed. So it can be difficult for family schedules. It can be difficult for individuals. You have to, I mean, we have just gone through this process of, okay, summer is ending. We don't have camp until 5 o'clock. What are we going to do in terms of who's picking up who's taking who to this activity? What time are we going to be able to have family dinner together? There's a lot of schedules, and you have to think about, what your kids need, what you're going to be doing them after school hours, helping them with their homework, getting them to activities, all of those things that need to be done. So it's a big time of transition for the family schedule and for individuals. I mean, think about what your kids are going through. They have to adjust to a new routine, new people. They have to be eating at different times than they were eating, waking up at different times that they were eating, brand new activities. All of that is happening, plus they're learning. So you can expect, particularly in the beginning, a good amount of both emotional and physical exhaustion. I will say I saw it the most when my kids were younger. Now that they're older, they don't have quite as much of that emotional and physical exhaustion, but there was definitely an increase in irritability around going back to school. No question about that. So one of the ways to successfully transition back to school is the first thing is just to try to get the sleep back to normal. I don't know about you guys. I know you guys are all over, but I will say there's no question that in Florida in the summer, the sun doesn't go down until very late, and we stay up later and they sleep later. And that's fine for the summer, but that doesn't work out so well when fall comes, well, when school comes back. So a few weeks before, we try to get them into an earlier bedtime, making sure we're pretty consistent with that bedtime routine. One thing I really try to make sure of is that we are not on vacation the week before school starts, that week before school starts, we are home and we are adjusting and we're trying to get back to routine. I know some people who make sure their kids have camp the week before because they're at home and they have to get into the routine of getting out the door at a certain time, coming home at a certain time, and they feel like that's a nice transition. For us, we didn't do the camp that week. I kind of wanted them to rest and be able to go to the meet the teacher and, all of that and prep in the various ways that they had to prep. But I can see both of those working. Sometimes this is not a terrible time to do that melatonin in order to get them to go to sleep a little bit earlier, just on a temporary basis. Melatonin is supposed to be used for jet lag, and so it can be useful for that. So that's something you can talk to your pediatrician about. So getting into that structure and routine, getting used to packing lunches every day, and practicing that morning routine about what it's going to take to get out the door. So for young kids, it's really great to have a visual reminder like this. So we did this with my kids. Certainly there were pictures that we put together. And this was a way of dealing with children who don't like to be told what to do directly by their parents, which is probably many children. But instead you can say, well, what does the chart say that you need to do next? What does the chart say? Does the chart say you're ready? Does the chart say you're done? And it's just a visual reminder, and it's pictorial for those young kids. For older kids, it might be something where it looks a little bit different. I think I added that. Yes, so for this, I'll go back in a second, but this is what we did in my house. So I had my kids actually do this, which is in the morning, what do they need to make sure that they are leaving with? Okay, so they have to have their lunch, they have to make sure their water bottle's full, they brush their teeth. Again, we're in Florida, so sunscreen is a daily thing, put on sunscreen, make sure that they have, their watch or their phone and their backpack. So they have all of the things that they need. So getting that kind of like just a list kind of idea together is a great idea for kids that are older, and then pictures for kids that are younger. And honestly, those lists, those Post-it notes, they help me. So one thing that, my daughter, she was kind of like, well, this is kind of babyish to have this list. And I said, no, adults do this all the time, particularly when we're transitioning to a new routine. It's useful to have, a list on your phone or a Post-it note. Collecting school supplies, it's really great if you can involve your kids. If they can have their own list and come with you to Walmart or wherever you're going to pick up stuff, and then it gives them some ownership of it. At whatever level is developmentally appropriate for your kid. So a young kid might just help you put things into the cart. An older kid might, take a look at the list and pick things out in the store, just with appropriate level of support. It's also really great to remember to write information down that your kids might need. Specifically, your home address. They should have it memorized. It's a good opportunity to review or teach it. Parent phone numbers, their locker combination, if they still have lockers. And most of your kids hopefully have a 504 plan or some sort of emergency medical plan. And so it's really great to go over with them and say, okay, so I want to talk to you about what your 504 plan is, again, at a developmentally appropriate level. So for young kids, not tell them very much, just say, I made a plan with your teacher and the nurse, and if you need any factor, they're going to have it stored at school for you, and they're going to call me. So that's for a young plan, you would say that. For an older child, you would hopefully have them attend their 504 meeting if they're in high school and be well versed in it and be able to explain the plan to any adult. Just developmentally appropriate. Another thing that's great is to make a family schedule or calendar. This just provides a lot of structure and routine and support for kids, and it makes them feel safe and secure. And what you want to do is that when a child is pretty young, you don't want it to show them a big month-long calendar. That's really overwhelming. They don't understand how to interpret it. So for your preschoolers, for your early elementary kids, you just want to have something that's like a daily routine. This is what's going to happen every day. If they can read, you can have simple words. If they are too young to read, you can have pictures. So daily routine for the young kids. For older kids, you can certainly have more of a monthly or weekly. So I'm going to show you guys some samples, including the one that I worked out with my kids that they made. Okay, so what we have here is this is an example of a daily schedule for a younger child, preschool, early elementary school age. And this gives pictures, and then there's also words. And, you don't have to check it off, or you can put it into, a plastic binder and check it off every day. But it's not as important that it be checked off as they just kind of understand this is what's going to happen. This is my routine, and this is what's going to happen. And there's a lot less fighting if you do the same thing every day. If they know that they're going to take a bath right after dinner, then there's a lot less fighting about taking a bath. It's just what we do. And sometimes, you have to do it for a few weeks before it becomes comfortable and part of the routine. But getting into like that kind of schedule, that afternoon routine, that evening routine, really can make the transition back to school easier. And then this is an example of my kids in their monthly August calendar. They wrote down their major activities that they were going to have. And so, you know, we have a lot of things on there so they can look at that and know what's happening that day. And if you can't get there, guess they're at martial arts right now. And then in the afternoon, and we are still struggling with this, is coming home and not just collapsing, but to do some of the basics. You know, you help them age appropriately, but by the time they're in late elementary school, they should be doing a lot of this on their own. You know, unpacking their own lunch, hanging up their own bag, putting away their own shoes, and maybe with assistance doing their homework. You know, but getting into that routine of putting things away and being responsible for it. I remember when my son was 3, his only job that he had was to just put his shoes in the shoe bin. That was the only thing he had to do. And then we upped it. Put your shoes in the shoe bin and hang up your, the tiny, tiny backpack. Hang up your tiny backpack. And then it gradually moved to higher and higher over time to the point where he was pretty self-sufficient. By the time he was in probably 2nd or 3rd grade, he could do a lot of this on his own. Okay, so another thing is in terms of successfully transitioning back to school, is to have conversations with them about it, prep them for it emotionally. One thing that's really important to do is to model positive attitude toward the school and the teachers. You might hate a particular policy that the school has put into place, or you might wish your child had been assigned a different teacher, but try not to let your child see that. Try to make sure that they see you being positive, because if you're positive, they're going to follow that attitude. Remind them of the positives about school. So this year in particular, there was a little less positive energy in our household, at least. And it was a lot more of, we're going to write essays again. We're going to have homework again. We're going to do math again. And I spent some time saying, but you're going to see all your friends and you're going to learn about stuff that's interesting to you. And aren't you really excited about that art class? Things like that. And remind them of the positives about it. But do talk to them about their feelings and their worries. So I'll tell you a little story. We went to do laptop pickup for my 7th grader about 10 days before school started. And something about walking in that building and getting that computer and logging on made him remember that he was feeling really anxious about having to do math again. And so we talked about that. And so we made up a plan. And I found online, I found like a 6th grade math review worksheet, and with a key, because I needed help too, to make sure I knew how to do these correct. And I said, okay, we're just going to do 2 math problems today. That's it, just 2. And we did 2 math problems and he was okay. And then the next day he was pretty grumpy about it, but we did a few more. And then over time, actually, he started getting a lot less grumpy about it, feeling more positive about it. He's like, yes, you're right. I do remember this stuff. And by the time he went back to school, he was like, I got this, I'm fine. So those little tiny exposures just reduce their anxiety about it. They might be nervous about eating lunch. So you talk them through, what is your worry about eating lunch? Are you worried that you're not going to have somebody to sit with? Maybe there's someone that we can find for you. Who do you think might be there? You know, those kinds of things. Talk it through and try to give them some help. It's also really great to facilitate bonding with some other kids if you can get kids together with other kids that they might be in class with. I will say my daughter was very disappointed that she didn't have any close friends in her class this year. So I tried to get us all together, you know, some of her better friends to meet up for ice cream after the first day of school, which is a nice tradition that we have and a lot of families have, getting taken out for ice cream at the end of the day. And I think it made her feel a lot more positive and realize, you know, I'm still going to see my friends, even if I don't happen to be in class with them. And waking up your child's brain. So I told you about my son in math, needing to kind of, math is the big thing that you really lose the most ground in. For my rising 5th grader, I said to her, I just want you to review your multiplication tables because you haven't thought about them all summer. And so that's something that we did. And then she was feeling more confident when she walked in. It's really beneficial if you can to attend any orientation or meet the teacher opportunities. They really help get the kids feeling excited. Teachers are super positive. They get to feel those positive associations and see the excitement of their teachers and feel more comfortable with their surroundings. So that can be really helpful for transitioning back. And then I will say I tried to keep my work schedule as light as I possibly could, which I understand was a complete privilege to be able to do so that first week of school. But it's definitely not a week to take on something extra. It's definitely not a week to say, okay, I'm going to schedule a doctor's appointment. You want to just, they're burnt out. I mean, they're tired. They went through a lot that day. They really, push their brains. And so it's great if they can have some downtime and a little bit of extra comfortable time and time with you after school. It's a really great week to try to prioritize having dinner together as a family, to give them that kind of comfort and that time to process what happened to them and talk about things. And that's all that I've got. So we can have time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Juliana. That was fantastic. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. One of the questions is, many kids in our community have other special needs in addition to their bleeding disorders. What advice do you have for kids of other special needs?
I mean, so I understand. One of my kids have special needs. In fact, both my kids have 504 plans and special needs in different ways. And I certainly work with kids who have tons of different special needs. I think there's kind of advice for the child and there's advice for the parents. So one of the things I've been saying to a lot of my therapy clients this week has been, okay, your child has an IEP or they have these special learning needs or they have this diagnosis. And this really does apply to bleeding disorders as well. You want to think to yourself, what is it that I need to let the teacher know so the teacher can be successful in working with my child? So that might be an email that says, hi, my child has hemophilia. Let me explain this to you. They do have a 504 plan, but here's what I need you to know. And I want you to have my cell phone number, easy access to it in case you need me for anything. My child has celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease triggered by gluten. And so I have already been fielding text messages from the teacher saying, can she have this? Can she have this? That kind of thing. And I always try to meet with the teachers before school even starts to go over the health condition. I frame it to them as, spend 15 minutes with me and it will save you a lot of difficulty because I can explain everything that you need to know and you can feel confident about taking care of my child. And then I say, here's my cell phone number. If you text me from your cell phone, I promise I will not share it with any other parents. I promise it will only be between us and I won't abuse it. So you're not texting them to ask them what's the homework assignment. It's really only for dealing with your child's special needs. And so trying to be that facilitator, the beginning of the year, they've got a bunch of new students. They don't know all their students that well yet. And it's hard to remember everything. You just can't remember all of those special needs. So trying to give them that information. The other thing is to really talk your child up as feeling like so that they walk in feeling really good about themselves. And this is a process. So, and it's not one that necessarily happens overnight, but when you have a special need, there's kind of a denial phase and there's an anger phase, just like with any grief and loss. And you get to an acceptance phase and you get to a phase where you're proud of who you are. You're proud to be part of the community. You see the positives of your special need. And I certainly hope that many, many kids who have those special needs end up in a place where they feel that way. They feel positive about it. They see the benefits. And so really making sure that you're having conversations with your child about, how do you feel about having the special need? How do you feel about having a bleeding disorder? What can we do for you to make it a successful year? And, you do want to validate their feelings about it. Say, yeah, that really, when you can't do what every other kid can do on the playground, that really does suck. And I'm sorry that happens to you. It's not fair. validate, but then also say, but let's focus now on what you can do. What are the things that are really fun for you to do on the playground? And that kind of approach. If you've got anything more specific, I'm happy to answer it about a specific special need.
Thank you so much. The next question is, how can siblings support their bleeding disorder sibling at school?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I will say that even when my kids are fighting like cats and dogs at home, I am always informed that they're very kind to each other in public. And I think that there is this sense that happens. So when you've got two kids in the same house, they're kind of competing for mom and dad's attention. And when you've got two kids who know each other, they're from the same family, but then they're in a brand new situation, they do tend to have one another's backs. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that siblings can support one another. You know, I'd certainly, if you have the unaffected sibling, you can certainly let the teacher know, hey, if my child with a bleeding disorder is having a rough time and they would be given comfort by seeing their sister or brother, it's perfectly fine with me if you let them do that. And that's perfect, or even just for a quick visit, for a quick hug, if that's what's necessary. But I think it's also just important for them to know that for you to talk to the kids themselves about having each other's back and supporting one another in the school environment, and get down to it. Like, what does that mean? So, you know, so you might come up with a specific situation. I'm kind of curious, like if you have a specific situation you're asking about, but if there's a situation where maybe there's been some teasing or something, then having a family conversation about like what that feels like, and is there any role that the sibling can play in helping to alleviate some of that. Humor is a great way. Having someone else stand up for you is usually a really good way of making teasing kind of diminish. So I wonder if that could be helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question is pretty specific. My child is age 5 and has ADHD. They still struggle with night waking. Melatonin and even Clonidine doesn't seem to help. Do you have any other recommendations to help with sleep? They do have a routine.
So I think you probably need a sleep study. So I think you need to go to a sleep specialist at this point, because you've tried a lot of what's out there. I'm wondering if there is something going on along the lines of there could be a vitamin or mineral deficiency. Like, for example, low ferritin has been linked to night waking. Also, sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea has been linked to night waking. So that's just being born with adenoids and tonsils that are too large for your airway, and it wakes you up in the middle of the night. My daughter actually had to have her tonsils and adenoids removed because it was causing obstructive sleep apnea at night. Incidentally, just so you know, certainly sleep disorders are more common in ADHD, but I also have to wonder in your particular case, if whatever is causing the poor sleep might also be causing the ADHD symptoms. Like, for example, if it is sleep apnea, is it possible that the poor sleep result is because there's evidence that once you get the sleep back on track, that those ADHD symptoms can resolve a lot. So even if it is biological inherited ADHD, the lack of sleep is not helping. It's certainly not helping you. It's very difficult having a child who is waking up in the middle of the night. And so I would definitely recommend a sleep specialist. They are often pediatric pulmonologists. I know that seems like a strange specialty, but because it's often related to apnea, the sleep specialists often are pulmonologists. So I would check in with the nearest major children's hospital and see if they have a specialist.
Great, fantastic advice. Just a quick reminder before we go to the next questions, if anyone in the audience has questions, please put those into the Q&A. We should have time to answer all of these questions as they come in. So the next question is, in your presentation, you referenced a study where it says that that children are losing ground during the pandemic. Can you give us a little bit more information on where we could find that study, or which study it was that you referenced?
Yeah, so the particular study I referenced was McKinsey, and it was published in 2021.
Okay.
So that is where, and that was from iReady assessment data, which is maybe not the most fantastic measure, but it's a decent measure, especially if we're using it to measure change over time. But there have been a number of studies that have been referencing what's been going on in the pandemic. This one was from McKinsey.
Perfect. Thank you. So the next question is, how can parents communicate better with school administration who do not take bleeding disorders seriously?
So unfortunately, sometimes we have to bring in someone who is a professional outside of ourselves. If you're in a situation where your child's serious medical condition is not being taken seriously and not being handled appropriately, then there's educational advocates and there are educational lawyers. Now, there's certainly things that you can do on your own, and I think there's certain really good ways to approach it. But if you don't get results, then certainly you're going to want to look into hiring an educational advocate or lawyer. Sometimes spending a few $100s on that can save you an awful lot of money in medical expenses in the long run. So just something to think about. In general, I think it's a good idea to send an email to, the administration, to they might be called a staffing specialist or a special education coordinator. And don't hesitate to reach out to your school board representative or the school superintendent, honestly, if it escalates to that point. Certainly try handling it with the teacher and the school administration first. But if you don't get responses to that, then bring it up to the next level. There's a very large bureaucracy in our school systems, and sometimes that's what it takes to get it done. So the things that I would do is I would say, this is, my child is in this school. They have a 504 plan, or they need a 504 plan. This is their medical condition. Attach a diagnosis note from the child's doctor, and then say, if there are violations of the 504, you want to document those. You want to write down, even if it's just on a piece of notebook paper, every time that you feel like your child's rights have been violated, the date and exactly what happened, who said it to you. And then I would, write an accounting of what's going on and saying, I look forward to working with you to resolve this so this doesn't happen in the future. Schools know that they are legally liable for the safety of their students. And so that approach should get you where you want to go. And then I know that, I believe, Heather, there's this online. I have done lectures for HFA on how to get a 504 plan for your child with some more detailed information in there on how to go about that. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully, maybe you can reach out and Heather can send you a link, or I can send you a link to my PowerPoint about that, about how to go about getting that 504 plan. Because unfortunately, sometimes it can be a struggle. It shouldn't be, especially in our public schools, but it can be. I'm sorry that's happening. I know that's really frustrating.
It is. I agree. So one question that came through was, a lot of the presentation talks about ways to talk to your child about their own anxiety and their adjustments to school. Do you have any suggestions where the family dynamic is such that the kids actually seem pretty fine about the transition, but the parents are really struggling? I'm asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend, Heather?
Yeah.
That was actually the subject of my therapy session earlier today. The kid seems fine, but the mom is having an awful lot of anxiety, and that's okay. I mean, that's not unrealistic. All right. We know that things don't always go exactly the way we would want them to. You're taking your child who has a medical disorder and putting their safety and their health in the hands of other people for a long period of the day. And that's, especially the younger they are, the more worrisome that is. But even as they get older, It's certainly worrisome. And so I guess that there's a lot of ways that I can think of to handle that. I guess my first question is, if I were in therapy with a person who's experiencing that, I would want to know kind of, is this a bit of a anniversary reaction? Like you're going back to school and think bad things have happened at school. So are you experiencing like heightened anxiety just because of the back to school? Or is there something concrete and specific that you're worried about? Is it based in reality? It very well may be. And it's also possible we all sometimes fall into anxious patterns of thinking that are not necessarily reality based. That's why we have anxiety. And that's very typical and very normal. And especially when you have a child with a health condition, it's very normal. So like, how realistic is this worry? Is there anything about this that I can control? Is there anything about this that I can change? And then if the answer is, I'm just nervous because my precious child is going to school and I'm not certain they're going to be safe, but everything is lined up the way that it should be, then that's just a matter of breathing, getting through it, using some of your own coping strategies, and in time, the anxiety will go down. Does that help?
That does help. I'll pass that along to my friend. Thank you. That's actually all the questions that we have. I just want to give people a final opportunity to ask any questions through the Q&A if there are any, and to say thank you to Dr. Bloom as expected. And as we have come to know and love, Dr. Bloom's presentations are always very, very helpful. And you have a true knack for being able to take this information and share it with all of us in such a thoughtful and considerate and knowledgeable way. So we very much appreciate it. I am going to take this opportunity to make a shameless plug for our next educational webinar, which is on September 6th. We are doing a webinar on joint inflammation and pain and finding the cause. If you're interested, you can sign up for that webinar on our website. And we will have webinars once a month at least for the remainder of 2022, and would love to see you there. Thank you, Jeanette. She just put the registration for that into the chat. If you are interested in sharing this recording or watching it again, we hope to have that up online in the next few days. So you're absolutely welcome to share the link or watch again in case you missed any of the wonderful references that were shared by Dr. Bloom, or you wanted to visit it again. But until then, I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thank you all so much for having me. I hope back to school goes great.